One night, my late wife's mother invited me to dinner. When I arrived, there was an extra place set at the table for my late wife, who had died 2 years ago. When I asked why, my mill turned pale and said, "Rich, there's something we never told you. Look, I'm going to be straight with you right from the jump. I almost sent that call straight to voicemail. You know that gut feeling you get when your phone rings and the caller ID shows a name that makes your stomach do that little flip thing? Yeah, that was me staring at Margaret Stone flashing across my screen like a neon warning sign at a sketchy motel. But here's the thing about guilt and morbid curiosity. They're like that friend who always talks you into bad decisions at 2 in the morning. Except it was 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, and I was eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container like the classy widower I'd become. "Rich, come over Friday night," Margaret said when I finally answered, her voice dripping with that syrupy politeness that people reserve for telemarketers, distant relatives they're about to ask money from, or apparently, the son-in-law they've barely tolerated for a decade. Just family. She said those 2 words like they meant something warm and fuzzy, like we were going to sit around sharing hot cocoa and fond memories. But I'd known this woman long enough to recognize the subtext. She was hiding something, and whatever it was wearing a cheap disguise. I hadn't stepped foot in Margaret's pristine colonial house since Lisa's funeral 2 years ago, and honestly, I'd been perfectly content keeping that streak alive. The woman never liked me. Not from day one when I showed up to meet Lisa's parents wearing jeans that had seen better days and driving a Honda Civic that made concerning noises when it turned left. Margaret had this way of looking at me like I was a persistent stain on her Persian rug, something she tolerated only because her daughter had inexplicably chosen me. She used to tell Lisa I was too practical for her, which was Margaret speak for too broke and too ordinary. Translation, I didn't summer in the Hamptons or know which fork to use at fancy restaurants, and apparently, that was a moral failing. But here's where it gets stupid. I said yes. Because guilt is a hell of a drug, and the ghost of my dead wife has a really persuasive way of making me do things I know are bad ideas. It's like she's still nagging me from whatever cosmic waiting room she's hanging out in, whispering, "Just go, Rich. What's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words, really. So Friday rolled around, and I actually made an effort. I found a button-down shirt that didn't look like I'd fished it out of the laundry basket, which I definitely had, but I ironed it, so that counts for something. I stopped at the liquor store and bought a bottle of wine that cost slightly more than a full tank of gas, because apparently, that's the price point where you show you care, but not so much that you're trying too hard. I even brushed my hair and put on shoes that weren't sneakers, which for me is basically black tie formal at this point. The drive over was exactly 17 minutes of me rehearsing small talk in my head and wondering if it was too late to fake a stomach virus. Margaret's neighborhood was one of those places where every lawn looked like it had been manicured with nail scissors, and every house screamed, "We have money, and we want you to know it." Her place sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, all white columns and black shutters, looking like something out of a magazine spread titled Traditional Elegance, or Places Where Fun Goes to Die. I parked on the street because Margaret had a thing about driveways and oil stains, rang the doorbell, and immediately regretted every decision that had led me to this moment. When she opened the door, she was wearing pearls, actual pearls, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rich, so glad you could make it," she said, like I'd just arrived at a hostage negotiation disguised as a dinner party. The house smelled exactly like I remembered: roasted chicken, expensive candles, and that particular scent of old money that's somehow both comforting and suffocating. Everything looked painfully familiar. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway that ticked too loud, the family photos arranged just so on the mantel, the spotless hardwood floors that made you feel guilty for existing. It was like walking into a museum dedicated to the life I used to have, back when Lisa was alive and family dinners were just regular torture instead of whatever fresh hell this was turning into. Greg was already there, my brother-in-law, standing in the kitchen looking uncomfortable in khakis and a sweater that probably cost more than my car payment. We did that awkward guy nod thing, the universal male greeting that says, "I acknowledge your presence, but let's not make this weird." He handed me a beer without asking, which was honestly the most thoughtful thing anyone in this family had done for me in 2 years. "How have you been?" he asked, which is what people say when they don't actually want to know how you've been but feel obligated to ask anyway. Living the dream, I said, taking a long pull from the beer. You know, talking to myself, eating cereal for dinner, becoming one of those guys who has strong opinions about paper towel brands. The usual. He almost smiled at that, which was progress. Greg wasn't a bad guy. He was just Margaret's son, which meant he'd been trained from birth to maintain appearances and never rock the boat. We moved into the dining room, and that's when I saw it. The table was set for four. For plates, for napkins folded into those fancy shapes that require a YouTube tutorial, for wine glasses catching the light from the chandelier overhead. I counted heads. Margaret, Greg, me. 3 people. The math wasn't mathing, as the kids say, or as I assume they say. I'm 43 and my cultural references are stuck somewhere around 2019. And that 4th place setting? It was at the head of the table. Lisa's spot. The chair she always sat in during family dinners, where she'd kick me under the table when Margaret said something passive-aggressive, where she'd pour me extra wine when the conversation got too painful. Empty now, but set like she was about to walk through the door any second, complaining about traffic and asking what was for dinner. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was acknowledging how completely bizarre this was. Expecting company, I said, gesturing at the empty place setting with my beer bottle. Or are we summoning spirits now? Because I gotta tell you, if we're doing a seance, I didn't bring the right supplies. Pretty sure you need candles and one of those Ouija boards from Target. The joke landed like a lead balloon in a library. Margaret's face went pale, and I mean pale like she'd seen a ghost, which was ironic considering the whole empty chair situation. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, started shaking so badly I thought she might drop it. Greg looked at the floor like it suddenly contained the secrets of the universe. The silence stretched out like taffy, getting thinner and more uncomfortable with each passing second. You know that feeling when you make a joke and nobody laughs, and you realize you've either said something wildly inappropriate or accidentally stumbled onto something real? Yeah, that was happening, except cranked up to 11. Rich, Margaret finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, and I swear to God, I'd never heard her sound like that before. Small, frightened, like she was the one who didn't belong here. She set down her wine glass with a trembling hand and looked at me with eyes that were suddenly too wet, too vulnerable, too human for the ice queen I'd known for all these years. There's something we never told you, she said, and just like that, the entire temperature of the room dropped about 40 degrees. Greg's face had gone from uncomfortable to full-on panic mode, and I was standing there with a beer in one hand and my car keys in my pocket, trying to figure out if I could make it to the door before whatever bomb they were about to drop actually detonated. About Lisa, Margaret continued, and my stomach did that thing where it simultaneously drops into your shoes and climbs into your throat. About who she really was. Okay, so here's where things went from awkward family dinner to what the actual hell is happening in about 3 seconds flat. Greg, my normally mild-mannered, sweater vest-wearing, plays-it-safe brother-in-law, suddenly bolted from the room like someone had yelled free money at a Black Friday sale. He disappeared through the doorway into what I'm pretty sure was Margaret's study, that room she always kept locked like it contained nuclear codes, or her real personality, or something equally dangerous. I stood there holding my beer, looking at Margaret, who was now staring at the empty chair like it might start talking back to her. Listen, I said, because apparently, I don't know when to shut up. If this is about Lisa's life insurance policy, I already spent it on therapy and a really disappointing trip to Vegas, so we're good there. Nobody laughed. Tough crowd. Greg came back carrying this wooden chest, and I'm not talking about some cheap thing you'd pick up at HomeGoods. This was legit antique looking, about the size of a shoebox, but heavier, with these intricate carvings on the sides that probably meant something to people who knew about antique furniture and gave a damn. The wood was dark, almost black, with brass corners that had that greenish patina that screams, I'm old and I've seen some stuff. And here's the thing, it looked familiar. Like, uncomfortably familiar. Lisa used to have a box kind of like this, kept it on her dresser for years. I always assumed it was full of old jewelry or love letters from her high school boyfriend, or whatever sentimental crap people keep in fancy boxes. I'd never actually looked inside because, you know, boundaries and also basic human decency. Plus, Lisa had this way of glaring at you when you touched her stuff that could freeze lava. Is this her stuff? I asked, setting down my beer because my hands suddenly felt too sweaty to hold anything. My voice came out weird, tight in a way that I didn't like. Because if we're going through her things, I should probably be more drunk for this conversation. Margaret didn't answer. She just looked at Greg with this expression that I couldn't quite read, somewhere between "please don't do this" and "we don't have a choice." Greg's face had gone pale, like someone about to confess to a hit and run or tell their parents they'd failed out of college. His hands were shaking as he pulled out this brass key from his pocket, small, old-fashioned, the kind of key that definitely didn't come from Ace Hardware. He slid the key into the lock, and I heard this soft click that sounded way too loud in the suddenly silent dining room. When he lifted the lid, I could see papers, letters, documents, photographs, all jumbled together like someone had packed them in a hurry. The paper was yellowed at the edges, and I could smell that old book smell, musty and familiar and wrong all at the same time. Right on top was a note, handwritten, and I recognized that handwriting immediately. Lisa's distinctive scrawl, all loops and slants, and the way she crossed her T's too high. I'd seen that handwriting on grocery lists, birthday cards, passive-aggressive notes on the fridge about me leaving dishes in the sink. Seeing it now made my chest do this weird thing where it felt too tight and too empty at the same time. I reached for the note before anyone could stop me, my hands moving on autopilot. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble if I held it too hard. The message was short, classic Lisa. Straight to the point with just enough drama to make you wonder if she was serious or messing with you. If you're reading this, something went wrong. Burn everything. Trust no one. I actually laughed, like, full-on laughed out loud. The kind of laugh that's not really about humor, but about your brain short-circuiting because it doesn't know how else to process information. That's my girl, I said, waving the note around like it was a winning lottery ticket. Dramatic to the end. What's next? A treasure map? Secret codes? Please tell me there's at least one cryptic riddle, because that would really complete the whole spy thriller vibe we've got going here. But then Greg pulled out a photograph, and I swear to God, the room started spinning. It was Lisa, definitely Lisa. I'd know that face anywhere, but younger, maybe mid-20s, wearing clothes I'd never seen before. She was standing outside some fancy building, one of those old brownstones that screams old money, and we summered in Martha's Vineyard before it was cool. And she wasn't alone. There was a guy next to her, tall, clean-cut, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my current wardrobe times 10. And here's the really messed up part. He looked like me. Not exactly like me, because this guy was clearly living his best life in a tax bracket I'd never even visit, but the resemblance was there. Same height, same build, same dark hair, except his was styled by someone who knew what they were doing, and mine looked like I cut it myself in the bathroom mirror after 3 beers, which I definitely had. But this guy, he had that confidence, that polish, that whole, I've never worried about money a day in my life, energy that I would never possess even if I won the lottery. His smile was perfect, his posture was perfect, everything about him screamed, I belong in a Ralph Lauren ad. I flipped the photo over with shaking hands. There was writing on the back in someone else's handwriting. Neat, precise, the kind of penmanship they don't teach anymore. Just a name and a date. William Carrington 4, July 2008. Who the hell is this? I asked, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. I looked up at Margaret, then at Greg, both of them staring at me like I was a bomb they weren't sure how to defuse. Seriously, who is William Carrington IV, and why does he look like my low-budget doppelganger? Margaret's hands were clasped in front of her so tight her knuckles had gone white. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish trying to figure out how to breathe air. Greg was looking anywhere but at me. The ceiling, the floor, the empty chair, anywhere that wasn't my face. Margaret, I said, slower this time, enunciating each syllable like I was talking to someone who didn't speak English. Who is this? She swallowed hard, her throat working like the words were physically painful to get out. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, the kind of whisper people use when they're confessing to something they've kept hidden for way too long. Your wife, she said, and I watched her mouth form the words like I was watching a foreign film without subtitles, wasn't exactly who she said she was. The beer bottle slipped from my hand. Not dramatically, Just a simple loss of grip, because my brain had apparently forgotten how hands worked. It hit the hardwood floor with a crash that sounded like a gunshot in the silence, glass shattering into a million pieces, beer spreading out in a pool that Margaret would normally have had a stroke over, but now just stared at like she couldn't care less about her precious floors. "I'm sorry," I said, laughing again because apparently that was my default setting now when reality decided to take a hard left turn into crazy town. "What?" Greg bent down and pulled out more photographs from the box, spreading them across the table like he was dealing cards in the world's worst poker game. Lisa at galas. Lisa at what looked like charity events. Lisa standing with people I vaguely recognized from business magazines I'd never read. And in several of them, William Carrington IV, always there, always smiling that perfect smile, always looking like he owned whatever room he was in. Her real name, Margaret said, tears now streaming down her face and ruining her perfect makeup, which honestly was more unsettling than anything else because I'd never seen this woman cry, not even at her own daughter's funeral, was Elizabeth Carrington. She was William's sister, and the life she built with you, all of it, was a cover to escape the family she was born into. I stared at the photographs, at the note, at the box full of secrets that my dead wife had apparently been keeping, and thought, yeah, this is fine. This is totally fine. My entire marriage was apparently a witness protection program that nobody told me about. Cool, cool, cool. "I need another beer," I said. "Actually, I need all the beers. Every single beer in this house. And possibly something stronger. Do you have anything stronger? Please tell me you have something stronger." So there I was, standing in Margaret's dining room surrounded by photographic evidence that my entire marriage had been built on lies, holding a fresh beer that Greg had wordlessly shoved into my hand, because apparently alcohol was the only reasonable response to finding out your dead wife was secretly a runaway heiress. I was about 3 seconds away from either laughing hysterically or flipping the entire dining room table when the doorbell rang. Not a normal doorbell ring, either. This was one of those long, insistent rings that said, "We're not going away," mixed with just a hint of "This is official business." The kind of ring that makes your stomach drop because nothing good ever comes from a doorbell that aggressive at 7:30 on a Friday night. Margaret's head snapped toward the door so fast I thought she might get whiplash. Greg, who'd been in the middle of pulling out yet another incriminating document from the box of secrets, froze like a deer that had just heard a gun cock. The look they exchanged wasn't the usual sibling telepathy thing. This was pure, unfiltered panic. "Are you expecting someone?" I asked, which in retrospect was a stupid question because their faces were screaming, "Absolutely not," and we're all about to die. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. Greg moved to the window and peeked through the curtains, not like a normal person checking to see who's at the door, but like someone in a mob movie making sure the cops haven't surrounded the building. His face went from pale to basically transparent. "Black sedan," he whispered, like the people outside might hear him through the walls and triple-paned windows. 2 men. Suits. Government plates. Now, I've never been a paranoid guy. I don't think the government is watching me. I don't stockpile canned goods for the apocalypse. And I've never once thought my phone was listening to my conversations. Mostly because my conversations are boring and nobody would want to listen to me argue with myself about what to have for dinner. But something about the way Greg said "government plates" made every hair on my arm stand up like they were trying to evacuate my body. "Don't open the door," I said, and the words came out of my mouth before my brain even processed them. Margaret looked at me like I'd just suggested we all strip naked and do the Macarena. "What are you talking about? We can't just ignore them. What if it's important?" Important. I gestured at the box, at the scattered photographs, at the note from my dead wife that literally said, "Trust no one." "Lady, I don't know what's happening here, but I've seen this movie before. This is the part where the mysterious men in suits show up asking questions, and it never, and I mean never, ends with cookies and polite conversation. It ends with people disappearing or databases being wiped or someone getting thrown in the back of an unmarked van." "You watch too much television," Margaret said, but her voice was shaking, and she was wringing her hands in that way people do when they know you're right but don't want to admit it. The doorbell rang a 3rd time, and now someone was knocking, hard, official knocks that sounded like they were using the meaty part of their fist instead of their knuckles. Mrs. Stone, we need to speak with you. It's regarding your daughter's estate. Estate? Right. Because mysterious government men always show up unannounced on Friday nights to discuss estate matters. Sure. And I'm the Queen of England. Back door, I said, already grabbing the wooden box and shoving it under my arm like it was a football, and I was making a desperate play for the end zone. Where's your back door? Rich, you're being ridiculous. Margaret started, but I was already moving, my body operating on pure instinct and probably too much adrenaline for someone who spent most of his time sitting at a desk job. Greg, bless him, pointed toward the kitchen. Through there, past the mudroom. But Rich, maybe we should just what? Open the door and have a nice chat about how Lisa was apparently a completely different person? About this box full of whatever the hell this is. I was speed walking through her pristine kitchen now, past the granite countertops and the fancy espresso machine that probably cost more than my car. No thanks. I've survived 2 years of grief counseling and awkward condolence casseroles. I'm not about to get disappeared by the men in black over information I didn't even know existed until 20 minutes ago. I could hear Margaret protesting behind me. Something about me being paranoid and overreacting and how we needed to handle this properly. But I was already in the mudroom, fumbling with the back door lock. My hands were shaking, from adrenaline or fear or the sheer absurdity of the situation. I couldn't tell. The lock finally clicked, and I burst out into Margaret's perfectly manicured backyard like a middle-aged man escaping from a particularly dangerous PTA meeting. The cool night air hit my face, and I could hear voices from the front of the house now. Official-sounding voices that definitely didn't belong to neighbors asking to borrow sugar. I ran across the lawn, probably destroying Margaret's precious grass in the process, clutching the wooden box to my chest like it contained the nuclear codes and my dignity. My car was parked on the street, thank God, about 50 yards from where I was currently doing my best impression of a fugitive. I could see the black sedan parked directly in front of Margaret's house, sleek and ominous, and exactly like every government vehicle you see in movies when things are about to go sideways. 2 men in dark suits were at the front door, one of them holding up some kind of badge or ID. I hit the unlock button on my key fob from across the yard. Worst decision ever, by the way, because my car made that stupid chirping sound that might as well have been a foghorn announcing fleeing person right here. I dove into the driver's seat, threw the box on the passenger side, and jammed my key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine roared to life, and by roared, I mean it made that concerning rattling sound it always makes when I start it cold, but at that moment, it sounded like the sweetest symphony ever composed. I threw the car into drive and hit the gas, my tires squealing against the pavement in a way that was definitely going to leave marks and probably wake up every dog in the neighborhood. In my rearview mirror, I could see one of the suits turn his head toward the sound. He said something to his partner, and they both started moving toward their sedan with that purposeful walk that said they were about to pursue. But I had a head start, and my piece of crap Honda might sound like it's dying, but it can move when it needs to. I blew through the stop sign at the end of Margaret Street. Sorry, traffic laws. We'll catch up later. And took a hard right that made the box slide across the passenger seat and crash into the door. The sedan was pulling out behind me now, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Okay, I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. You're being chased by government agents because your dead wife was secretly rich and left you a box of God knows what. This is fine. This is totally normal. Just another Friday night. I took a left, then another right, weaving through the suburban streets like I was in a car chase scene, except way less cool and way more terrified. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I thought it might actually break through my ribcage. The sedan was still behind me, maintaining a steady distance, not trying to catch up, but definitely not backing off either. I hit the main road and floored it, blowing past the speed limit by about 20 miles per hour. My car shook and rattled in protest, but it kept moving. The sedan matched my speed effortlessly, because of course it did, because government vehicles probably have engines that don't sound like they're coughing up a lung. By the time I merged onto the highway, I was laughing, actually laughing out loud, like a crazy person, which I guess I was now. The whole situation was so absurd, so completely insane, that my brain had apparently decided that hysterical laughter was the only appropriate response. Netflix thriller, I said to no one, to the box, to the ghost of Lisa wherever she was. My life just turned into a Netflix thriller, and I haven't even finished dessert. I didn't even get dessert. Margaret's roasted chicken is still sitting on that table, and here I am running from the feds over secrets I don't even understand. The sedan eventually fell back. Whether they lost me or decided I wasn't worth the chase, I couldn't tell. But I kept driving, heading toward home on pure autopilot, my hands still shaking on the wheel, my mind racing faster than my crappy car ever could. I made it home in record time, which is impressive considering I spent half the drive checking my rearview mirror like a paranoid drug dealer and the other half questioning every life choice that had led me to this moment. My house, a modest two-bedroom ranch that Lisa and I had bought back when we thought we'd fill it with kids and golden retrievers and all that suburban dream nonsense, looked exactly the same as I'd left it 3 hours ago. Same peeling paint on the shutters, same overgrown lawn that I kept meaning to mow, same welcome mat that was more ironic than welcoming at this point. But something felt off. You know that feeling, right? When everything looks normal, but your gut is screaming that something's wrong. Yeah, that was happening in stereo. I sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes, engine off, just staring at my front door like it might suddenly sprout teeth and eat me. The wooden box sat in the passenger seat, innocent and ominous at the same time, like Pandora's box if Pandora had been a runaway heiress with a flair for drama and terrible communication skills. Okay, Rich, I said to myself, because talking to yourself is totally normal behavior and not at all a sign that you're losing it. You're going to go inside, lock every door and window like you're preparing for the zombie apocalypse, and figure out what the hell is in this box. Simple. Easy. What could possibly go wrong? Famous last words, right there. I grabbed the box, hustled to my front door with the speed of a man who watches too many crime shows, and got inside. First thing I did, locked the door. Second thing, locked it again, because apparently one lock wasn't enough for my newly paranoid brain. Then I dead-bolted it, chained it, and for good measure, shoved a chair under the doorknob like I was barricading myself against a home invasion. The air inside felt too still, too quiet. Usually, my house has this lived-in quality. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old pipes, the general ambience of a place that's seen better days but still functions. But right now, it felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. I dumped the contents of the box onto my dining room table, the same table where Lisa and I used to eat breakfast, argue about whose turn it was to do dishes, plan vacations we never took. Now it was covered in evidence of a life I apparently knew nothing about. Old newspaper clippings, yellowed with age and smelling like attics and secrets. Financial records with numbers that had way too many zeros. Photographs of Lisa, no, Elizabeth Carrington, at events I'd never heard her mention, wearing clothes I'd never seen, smiling that smile I knew so well, but aimed at people I'd never met. And then I saw the headline. Front page of the Boston Globe, dated 15 years ago. Prominent banking heir William Carrington, 4 missing. Foul play suspected. I had to read it 3 times before my brain processed the words. William Carrington 4, the guy from the photo, the one who looked like me if I'd been born into money and better genetics, was missing. Presumed dead, according to the article. His car had been found abandoned near the harbor. No body, no witnesses, just gone like he'd been erased from existence. And Lisa, Elizabeth, had been his sister, which meant she'd lost her brother, probably around the same time she decided to disappear and reinvent herself as Lisa Carter, ordinary woman who married an ordinary guy and lived an ordinary life. Except nothing about this was ordinary. I poured myself a drink, whiskey, straight, because beer wasn't going to cut it anymore. My hands were still shaking as I sorted through more documents. Bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of. Letters addressed to Elizabeth Carrington at addresses in Boston, New York, somewhere in Connecticut. Legal documents with words like trust fund and beneficiary and numbers that made my head spin. So let me get this straight, I said to the empty room, to the ghost of Lisa, to the universe in general. You were loaded. Like stupid rich. And you decided to slum it with a middle-class IT guy who clips coupons and drives a car that sounds like it's actively dying. That was your brilliant plan. The house didn't answer, which was probably for the best because if it had, I would have completely lost it. I took a long drink, letting the whiskey burn its way down my throat, and kept digging. There were more articles about William Carrington, business deals gone wrong, allegations of money laundering, suspicious transactions involving offshore accounts. The Carrington family was apparently knee-deep in shady financial dealings, the kind of stuff that makes headlines and ruins lives and ends with people mysteriously disappearing. And then I found another article, this one smaller, buried in the business section. Elizabeth Carrington, daughter of banking magnate Thomas Carrington, reported missing. The date was a year after her brother's disappearance. The article was brief. Family declined to comment. Police investigating, no leads. And then nothing. Like she'd just vanished into thin air. Except she hadn't vanished. She'd become Lisa. She'd moved across the country, changed her name, built a whole new life, and somehow ended up married to me. A guy so ordinary that I once got excited about a sale on paper towels. I was halfway through my second drink, my brain spinning with conspiracy theories and questions I'd never get answers to, when I heard it. A soft click. So quiet I almost missed it under the sound of my own breathing and the blood rushing in my ears. It came from the back of the house. The back door. The door that led to my pathetic excuse for a backyard and that I never used because the lock was sticky, and who comes in through the back door anyway? Apparently, people who break into houses, that's who. My entire body went cold. Not the dramatic movie kind of cold, but the real kind. The kind where your blood actually feels like it drops 10 degrees and your stomach does that thing where it tries to climb out through your throat. I froze, whiskey glass halfway to my lips, listening so hard I thought my ears might start bleeding. Another sound, soft, deliberate. Someone was trying to be quiet, trying not to be heard, which was way worse than someone just kicking down the door and announcing their presence. Then came the sound of glass breaking. Not loud, not a crash, just a soft tinkle of glass hitting tile, like someone had carefully broken the small window next to the back door. The window I'd been meaning to replace for 6 months because the lock didn't work properly. Of course, I muttered, setting down my glass as quietly as I could. Right on cue. Because why wouldn't people break into my house on the same night I find out my dead wife was secretly a rich fugitive? That makes perfect sense. This is totally how Friday nights should go. I could hear movement now, careful, measured footsteps on my kitchen linoleum. Multiple people, because apparently one home invader wasn't enough for whatever cosmic joke my life had become. Male voices, low and professional, the kind of voices that belong to people who break into houses for a living. "Check upstairs," one of them said, and I swear my heart stopped beating for a solid 3 seconds. My brain kicked into survival mode. That primal part that apparently still works even when you're a middle-aged guy who hasn't run anywhere faster than a brisk walk in about 5 years. I grabbed the box, because leaving behind the thing people were clearly breaking in to steal seemed stupid, and headed for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time as quietly as I could, which wasn't very quiet because my stairs creak like they're auditioning for a haunted house soundtrack. The attic. I had an attic with a crawl space that Lisa used to make fun of me for never cleaning out. "It's full of spiders and your broken dreams," she used to say. Right now, those spiders and broken dreams were looking like my best option for survival. I yanked down the attic ladder. Slowly, carefully, because apparently I was capable of being quiet when my life depended on it, and climbed up into the darkness. The space was cramped, dusty, filled with boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns and all the crap you accumulate over a decade of living in one place. Behind the old brick chimney, there was a gap in the insulation, a space just big enough for a wooden box. I shoved it in there, covering it with some old newspapers and a box of ornaments that probably hadn't been used since Lisa died, and prayed my knees would hold out long enough to get back down. Below me, I could hear them moving through my house, opening doors, searching rooms, being way more polite about their breaking and entering than seemed necessary. My legs were shaking, from fear, from the awkward crouching position, from the sheer absurdity of hiding in my own attic like I was in some low-budget thriller. "Check upstairs," the voice said again, closer now, and I heard footsteps on my stairs. I held my breath. Actually held it, like I was underwater and surfacing would mean death. My Fitbit buzzed on my wrist, probably congratulating me on my elevated heart rate or asking if I was exercising, which would have been funny if I wasn't currently having a heart attack in my own attic. The footsteps reached the second floor. I could hear them checking the bathroom, the spare bedroom, my bedroom. Drawers opening, closets being searched, the methodical efficiency of professionals who'd done this before. Please don't look up, I thought. Please don't notice the attic ladder. Please be terrible at your job. The universe, for once, decided to cut me a break. The footsteps retreated, heading back downstairs. More voices, muffled conversations I couldn't quite make out. Something about not here and check the mother-in-law's place, and he must have it. They left through the front door, not even trying to hide the fact that they'd broken in, because apparently when you're scary enough, you don't have to worry about covering your tracks. I heard a car start, drive away, and then nothing but silence and my own ragged breathing. I stayed in that attic for another 20 minutes, just to be sure, my body cramping and my mind racing. When I finally climbed down, my house looked like a tornado had gone through it. Drawers open, cushions displaced, my life literally torn apart by strangers looking for secrets I'd just discovered existed. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and absolutely nothing else. The box stayed in the attic. My clothes, my photos, my life, all of it stayed behind. Because I wasn't stupid enough to stick around and see if they came back with friends. I drove like a man being chased by ghosts, which, technically, I was, if you count the ghost of my dead wife's secret life and the very real people who wanted whatever information she'd left behind. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, and I'm pretty sure I ran at least 2 red lights and a stop sign. But at that point, traffic violations were the least of my problems. I had exactly one place to go, one person who wouldn't ask too many questions before helping me, and that was Frank Mallory. Frank lived 3 streets over from my house, had lived there for probably 40 years, since before the neighborhood was the neighborhood, back when everything was cheaper and life made more sense. He was 80 years old, a Vietnam vet who'd survived 2 tours, 2 divorces, and a raccoon infestation that had become legendary in our neighborhood. The man was tougher than beef jerky left out in the sun, meaner than a snake when he needed to be, and the only person I knew who'd actually shoot someone if the situation called for it. We'd become friends in that weird way men become friends, bonding over broken lawnmowers and complained about property taxes, and occasionally sharing a beer on his porch while he told stories about the war that were probably 50% truth and 50% whiskey-fueled embellishment. He'd liked Lisa, called her a pistol and too good for you, Carter, which was accurate on both counts. I pulled into his driveway at about 9:30, my headlights cutting across his front lawn and probably waking up his neighbors, but I was way past caring about suburban etiquette. His house was a modest ranch, similar to mine but better maintained, with an American flag out front that he took down every night at sunset and put back up every morning at dawn without fail. I practically fell out of my car and stumbled up to his front door, pounding on it like a man being chased by demons, which again, technically accurate. The porch light flicked on, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being racked, that distinctive click-clack that you can't mistake for anything else, and that makes your entire body tense up even when you know you're not the target. The door opened about 6 inches, held by a chain, and Frank's weathered face appeared in the gap. He was wearing a bathrobe, one of those old man bathrobes that looks like it survived the Reagan administration, and holding his shotgun like he was born with it in his hands. His eyes were sharp though, alert in a way that made you remember this wasn't just some harmless old man, but someone who'd seen actual combat. "Jesus, Rich, you look like hell," he said, taking in my disheveled appearance, my wild eyes, the fact that I was sweating despite the cool night air. "Good news," I said, panting like I'd just run a marathon instead of driven 3 blocks. "It's not my blood this time." He raised an eyebrow at that, unhooked the chain, and opened the door fully. "Get inside before you wake up the whole damn street with your dramatic entrance." I didn't need to be told twice. I practically fell through his doorway into his living room, which smelled like Old Spice and gun oil, and that particular scent of old houses that have been lived in by the same person for decades. His walls were covered with military memorabilia, photos from Vietnam, his service medals in a shadow box, a flag that had been folded into that perfect triangle you only see at military funerals. Frank closed the door, locked it, and leaned his shotgun against the wall within easy reach. He looked me up and down like he was assessing casualties on a battlefield. "You want to tell me why you showed up at my house looking like you just escaped from a hostage situation, or should I start guessing?" So I told him everything, and I mean everything. The dinner at Margaret's, the box of secrets, William Carrington IV, Lisa's real identity, the men in suits, the break-in at my house. All of it spilling out in a jumbled mess of words that probably didn't make much sense, but Frank listened to anyway, his face getting more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, just staring at me with those sharp eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. Then he walked over to his liquor cabinet. Actual cabinet, not just bottles shoved in a kitchen cupboard like at my place, and poured 2 glasses of bourbon. Real bourbon, the expensive kind that people give as gifts and save for special occasions. He handed me a glass and knocked back his own in one smooth motion. "Your wife ever mention people after her?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes deadly serious. "No," I said, taking a shaky sip of bourbon that burned way better than the cheap whiskey I'd been drinking at home. "She mostly complained about my snoring and how I never put the toilet seat down. You know, normal married couple stuff." "Not exactly. Hey honey, by the way, I'm on the run from financial criminals, and my real name is Elizabeth." Frank walked over to the window and peeked through the curtains, scanning the street like he was checking for enemy combatants. "She told me once," he said quietly, still looking out the window, "if anything ever happened to her, keep you safe." I literally choked on my bourbon. "I'm sorry, what? She told you that? When? Why didn't you?" I stopped, my brain trying to process this new information. "She told you to keep me safe? Not the other way around." He turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Frank actually looked uncomfortable. "About 6 months before she died. Came over one afternoon when you were at work. Said she needed me to promise that if something happened to her, and she was specific about that, when something happens, not if, I'd look out for you. Make sure you were okay. And you didn't think to mention this before now?" My voice came out higher than I intended, somewhere between hysterical and furious. "She made me promise not to," Frank said, shrugging in that way that said he'd been following orders, and that was that. "Said you'd worry, that you were better off not knowing. Figured she had her reasons. Women usually do." "Her reasons," I repeated, laughing that laugh that wasn't really a laugh anymore. "Right. Her reasons included lying to me about her entire identity, apparently. So yeah, great reasons. Fantastic reasons. Really top-tier decision-making from my dead wife who—" Frank held up a hand, his face going stone-cold serious. "Headlights," he said simply. I looked at him like he'd just spoken Martian. "What? Headlights? Coming up the street. Slow. Too slow." He grabbed his shotgun and moved to the window in one fluid motion that was impressive for a man his age. I felt my stomach drop into my shoes for approximately the 15th time that night. Please tell me it's just someone coming home from a late dinner. Please tell me it's a lost pizza delivery guy. Please tell me it's literally anything other than. "Black sedan," Frank said, his voice flat. "2 men. Same ones from your description." "Oh, come on," I practically shouted, then immediately lowered my voice to a harsh whisper. "How did they find me? How do they even know I'm here? Are they tracking my car? My phone? Did they microchip me when I wasn't looking?" "Doesn't matter how," Frank said, already moving with the efficiency of someone who'd been in worse situations than this. "What matters is they're here, and we need to move." He crossed to his kitchen and grabbed his truck keys off a hook by the back door. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a Glock, because of course Frank had a Glock in his kitchen drawer like normal people keep spatulas, and checked the magazine with practiced ease. "Take my truck," he said, tossing me the keys. I caught them on pure instinct because my brain was still trying to catch up with the fact that this was actually happening again. "Head north, stay off the main highways, and for God's sake, ditch your phone. They're tracking you somehow." "What about you?" I asked, because despite everything, I wasn't about to let an 80-year-old man face down professional criminals on my behalf. Frank smiled, actually smiled. And it was the kind of smile that made you remember he'd survived actual war. "Son, I've been bored for about 20 years. This is the most excitement I've had since the raccoon incident of 2019. Now get out of here before I have to waste good ammunition on people who don't deserve it." The headlights were getting closer. I could see them through the window now, casting long shadows across Frank's lawn. The sedan had stopped at the end of his driveway. "Frank, go," he barked, and the command in his voice was pure military, the kind of order you don't question. I ran for the back door, truck keys clutched in my sweaty hand, and burst out into Frank's backyard. Behind me, I heard his front door open and Frank's voice, loud and authoritative, and just the right amount of crazy. "Can I help you, gentlemen? Because it's past 9:30, I'm in my bathrobe, and I've got a shotgun that doesn't care much for uninvited visitors." I didn't stick around to hear their response. I vaulted over Frank's back fence. Well, more like clumsily climbed over while nearly giving myself a hernia, and sprinted to where he kept his truck parked in the alley behind his house. A 1990 Ford F-150, powder blue, with more miles on it than should be legally possible, but built like a tank, and probably more reliable than anything made in the last decade. The engine turned over with a roar that sounded like freedom and bad exhaust. I threw it into drive and peeled out of that alley like I was starring in my own action movie. Except I was a middle-aged IT guy having a complete breakdown and not a trained spy, so it was less cool action hero and more panic dad energy. As I turned onto the main road, I checked my rearview mirror and saw figures moving in Frank's front yard. I heard what might have been a warning shot. Frank wasn't actually going to shoot anyone, probably, but he definitely knew how to make people think twice. That's when I learned two things that night that I'd never forget. 1. Octogenarians still had guts and were capable of being absolute badasses when the situation called for it. And 2. I really should have married someone boring. Someone whose idea of excitement was trying a new restaurant or binge-watching reality TV. Someone whose biggest secret was that she didn't actually like my mother. But no, I had to marry Elizabeth Carrington, runaway heiress with a box full of incriminating evidence and enemies who drove black sedans and broke into houses in the middle of the night. Next time, I muttered to myself, gripping Frank's steering wheel and heading north like he'd told me, I'm dating an accountant. A nice, boring accountant whose family doesn't launder money or mysteriously disappear. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, saw it was Margaret calling, and Frank's words echoed in my head, ditch your phone. Without thinking too hard about it, I rolled down the window and threw my phone out onto the highway, watching it bounce and shatter on the asphalt. There, problem solved. I was officially off the grid, driving a truck older than most of my coworkers, with no idea where I was going except north and away from whatever nightmare my life had become. I'd been driving for maybe 45 minutes, heading north on back roads and secondary highways like Frank had told me, when the phone rang. Except I didn't have a phone anymore, because I'd yeet-headed onto the highway like a rational person having a totally normal Friday night. So when I heard the distinctive ringtone, some generic melody that definitely wasn't mine, I nearly drove Frank's truck straight into a ditch. The sound was coming from the glove compartment. I pulled over onto the shoulder, hazard lights on, and sat there for a solid 10 seconds just staring at the glove box like it might contain a bomb or a really aggressive raccoon. Because at this point, either option seemed equally plausible. Finally, I popped it open, and there was a cell phone inside. One of those old flip phones that looked like it had survived Y2K and several presidential administrations. It was ringing. The screen said, unknown caller, which was exactly the kind of ominous detail that makes you want to throw this phone out the window too. But I was running out of phones and options. I answered it. Yeah. Mr. Carter? The voice was male, calm, professional, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd never panicked in their entire life. Don't hang up. I'm a private investigator. Name's Daniel Cortez. I've been following your wife's case. Oh, great, I said, laughing because apparently that was my default response to insanity now. Another guy who knows more about my marriage than I do. Let me guess. You're going to tell me she was actually a spy? A mobster? Maybe she was working for the CIA? Because at this point, nothing would surprise me. She could have been an alien from Mars, and I'd just be like, sure, that tracks. He chuckled, actually chuckled, like I'd said something genuinely funny instead of having a breakdown in a stolen truck on the side of a highway. You're funnier than I expected. Lisa mentioned you had a sense of humor. That stopped me cold. You talked to Lisa? When? She's been dead for 2 years. Before she died, Cortez said, his tone shifting to something more serious. About 3 years ago, actually. She hired me to investigate her family's business dealings. Said she needed documentation, evidence, something concrete that could hold up in court if things went sideways. I sat there in Frank's truck, engine idling, watching cars pass by on the highway while my brain tried to process this information. Let me get this straight. My wife, who apparently wasn't even named Lisa, hired a private investigator to build a case against her own family, And nobody thought to mention this to me? Her actual husband. She was protecting you, Cortez said simply. The less you knew, the safer you'd be. The Carrington family isn't just wealthy, Mr. Carter. They're dangerous. Old money, political connections, the kind of people who make problems disappear permanently. Yeah, well, they're not doing a great job because I'm currently very aware of the problems, and the problems are definitely aware of me. I shot back. I've had my house broken into, been chased by men in suits, and I'm currently driving my elderly neighbor's truck while trying not to have a complete mental breakdown. So the whole keeping me safe plan? Not super effective. Cortez was quiet for a moment. Listen carefully. Lisa wasn't who you thought she was, but not in the way you're probably thinking. She wasn't some criminal on the run. She was the daughter of William Carrington III, Boston banking magnate, philanthropist, and one of the most sophisticated money launderers on the East Coast. Money laundering, I repeated flatly. Of course, because why would it be something simple like tax evasion or jaywalking? Her brother, William IV, the one you saw in the photos, he figured it out first. Found evidence that their father was using the family banks to wash money for everyone from corporate embezzlers to organized crime. He was going to go public, expose everything. 2 weeks later, his car was found abandoned at the harbor. No body, no witnesses. Case went cold within 6 months. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick, like I might need to open the truck door and lose what was left of my dinner on the side of the highway. And Lisa? Elizabeth, he corrected gently. She knew her brother didn't just disappear. She spent a year digging, following his trail, copying files, building her own case. Then she realized she was next on the list. So she ran, changed her name, moved across the country, tried to build a normal life while keeping all her evidence hidden, waiting for the right moment to use it. And she married me because... I couldn't even finish the sentence. Was I just convenient cover? The perfect disguise? Because she loved you, you idiot, Cortez said, and there was actual warmth in his voice. I met with her a dozen times. She talked about you constantly, said you were the only real thing in her life, the only person who saw her as just Lisa, not as a Carrington or an heiress or a target. You were her escape from all of this. I had to pull over completely now because my hands were shaking too hard to drive. I put the truck in park and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying not to cry like a middle-aged man having an emotional crisis in a borrowed vehicle. So what happened? I finally managed. How did she die? And don't tell me it was actually a car accident like everyone said. Another pause. This one longer, heavier. The official report says mechanical failure. Brake line failed on a mountain road. But I've seen the photos, talked to people who investigated the scene. Those brake lines were cut, Mr. Carter. Professional job. Made to look like an accident. And there it was. The confirmation of what some part of me had suspected for 2 years, but never wanted to admit. Lisa, Elizabeth, hadn't died in some random accident. She'd been murdered. Killed by her own family, probably. Or whoever they'd hired to do their dirty work. The people who came for you tonight, Cortez continued, his voice steady and matter-of-fact like he was discussing the weather. They think you have what she left behind. Documentation, evidence, financial records. They're right, aren't they? You found something. Maybe, I said, because I wasn't stupid enough to confirm anything to a voice on a phone, even if that voice seemed to know everything already. Let's say hypothetically I did. What would hypothetical me do with hypothetical evidence? Stay alive long enough to use it, he said. And trust me, I know that's asking a lot, but I've been working this case for 3 years. I know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically, and, in a few cases, literally. I can help you. Before I could respond, before I could decide whether I trusted this guy or if this was another trap in a night full of traps, my new borrowed phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. Come home. We need to talk. Margaret. I showed the phone to nobody because I was alone in a truck, but I read the message out loud anyway. Margaret wants me to come home. She needs to talk. Don't, Cortez said immediately. That's not Margaret texting you. Or if it is, she's not alone. They're using her to lure you back. Right? I said, because of course they were. Walk straight into the lion's den so they can kill me or make me disappear like William IV. Great plan. Really tempting offer. I'll definitely get right on that. Where are you now? Cortez asked. I looked around at the dark highway, the exit sign that said I was somewhere north of Harrisburg. Nice try. I've watched enough movies to know I don't give my location to mysterious voice on the phone. Smart, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to text you an address. A diner, 24-hour place, public enough that nobody's going to try anything stupid. Meet me there. Bring whatever you found. We'll figure out our next move together. And if I don't, then you keep running until they catch up with you, which they will eventually because they have resources and connections, and you have what? A old truck in righteous anger? He had a point. Or until you decide to go to the authorities, at which point you'll discover that half the authorities are either on the Carrington payroll or too scared to touch them. Your choice. My phone buzzed again, this time with an address, Sullivan's Diner, Route 22. Below it, another message, order the pancakes. They're the only thing worth eating at 3 a.m. Cortez. I sat there in Frank's truck, watching the occasional car pass by, thinking about Lisa, Elizabeth, and everything she'd hidden from me to keep me safe. Thinking about William IV at the bottom of some harbor. Thinking about brake lines cut on a mountain road. Why should I trust you? I finally asked. Because your wife did, Cortez said simply. And because right now, I'm the only person offering to help instead of hunt you. That's worth something. He had a point. A good point, actually. Fine, I said. But if this is a trap, if you're working with them, I want you to know that I'm fully prepared to die embarrassingly while trying to fight back. I took one self-defense class in 2003. I remember exactly none of it, but I'll give it my best shot. He laughed, a real laugh this time. Noted. See you in an hour, Mr. Carter. And do me a favor. What? Stop throwing phones out of vehicles. They're expensive, and Frank's going to want that one back. He hung up before I could ask how he knew about the phone-throwing incident, which was probably for the best, because the answer would have just freaked me out more. I sat there for another minute, looking at the address on the screen, weighing my options. I could keep driving north, disappear somewhere in Canada maybe, live out my days as a lumberjack or whatever people do when they're on the run. Or I could meet this Cortez guy, take a chance that he was actually trying to help, and maybe, just maybe, figure out what Lisa had died trying to accomplish. Next time, I told her ghost, told the universe, told nobody. We're having a very serious conversation about communication in relationships. This whole secrets and mystery thing? Not working for me. I put Frank's truck in drive and headed for Sullivan's Diner, hoping pancakes and a private investigator would somehow make more sense than anything else that had happened tonight. Spoiler alert, they wouldn't. Sullivan's Diner looked exactly like every other 24-hour establishment that's seen too many truckers, too many bad decisions, and not enough health inspections. The neon sign flickered like it had a neurological condition. Half the letters were out, and the parking lot was populated by exactly 3 vehicles. A semi-truck, a beat-up Honda that made my car look like a luxury vehicle, and a sleek black SUV that definitely didn't belong in this aesthetic. I pulled Frank's truck into a spot near the exit, because I'd learned my lesson about easy escapes tonight, and sat there for a minute, watching the windows. Through the grease-stained glass, I could see maybe 4 people inside. A waitress who looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else, a trucker hunched over coffee, and 2 people sitting in a booth near the back. One of them raised a hand. Not a wave, just a simple acknowledgement. That must be Cortez. Okay, Rich, I muttered, checking Frank's glove compartment for weapons and finding exactly nothing useful except a flashlight and some ancient beef jerky. You're walking into a diner at 11:30 at night to meet a stranger who knows way too much about your life. This is fine. This is totally fine. Nothing bad has ever happened in a creepy roadside diner. I got out of the truck, left it unlocked in case I needed to make a quick getaway, and headed inside. The door chimed, one of those bells that announced you were either a customer or a serial killer, and at this point, I wasn't sure which category I fell into anymore. The smell hit me immediately. Burnt coffee, old grease, and that particular aroma of places that have been open continuously since the Carter administration, the Jimmy one, not me. The waitress looked up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd given up on life around her 3rd shift, nodded toward the back booth, and went back to staring at her phone. Cortez stood up as I approached. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, Hispanic, wearing a leather jacket over a button-down shirt like he couldn't decide if he was going for professional investigator or guy who rides motorcycles on weekends. Clean cut, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a handshake that was firm without being aggressive. "Mr. Carter," he said. "Thanks for coming." Did I have a choice? I slid into the booth across from him, my back to the wall because apparently I'd absorbed some paranoia survival skills tonight. "Not really," he admitted with a slight smile. Then he gestured to the woman sitting next to him, and I realized I'd been so focused on Cortez that I'd barely registered her presence. She was maybe 40, Asian American, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive and professional and completely out of place in this diner. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she had the kind of face that said she didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone, ever. She looked like every lawyer from every legal drama I'd ever seen, except real and somehow more intimidating. "This is Joanna Lee," Cortez said. "Attorney. She's been working with me on your wife's case." "Of course she has," I said, because at this point, why not add a lawyer to the mix? Does everyone know more about my marriage than I do? Should I be taking notes? Maybe we should start a support group. Husbands Who Married Secret Heiresses Anonymous. Joanna didn't crack a smile. She reached down beside her and lifted something onto the table, a wooden box. The exact same wooden box I'd seen at Margaret's house. The same box I'd risked my life grabbing from Margaret's dining room, stuffing documents into my jacket, running from men in suits. Except this wasn't that box. This one was pristine, no scratches, the brass fittings shinier. "What?" I started. "Your wife left instructions for us," Joanna said, her voice crisp and professional, like she was reading a will instead of blowing my mind in a truck stop diner. "The real ones. What you found at Margaret's house was a decoy." I stared at the box, then at her, then at Cortez, then back at the box. "I'm sorry, what?" "So I risked my life, multiple times tonight. By the way, it's been a whole thing, for a fake box? Are you kidding me right now?" "Your wife was thorough," Cortez said, and there was something like respect in his voice. She knew they'd come looking eventually, so she created multiple versions, planted them in different locations, each with just enough real information to seem legitimate, but nothing that could actually hurt anyone. "Except me," I pointed out. "It definitely hurt me. I got chased, my house got broken into, I traumatized an 80-year-old veteran." "Frank's fine, by the way," Cortez interjected. "Checked in with him 20 minutes ago. Gave those guys hell, apparently. They left empty-handed and probably reconsidering their career choices." That made me feel slightly better, but only slightly. Joanna opened the real box, slowly, carefully, like she was handling evidence in a courtroom, which I guess she was. Inside were ledgers. Real ones, leather-bound and thick, filled with pages of handwritten entries, numbers, dates, signatures. Financial records that looked like they belonged in a museum or a very specific type of federal investigation. She pulled out one ledger and opened it to a marked page, turning it so I could see. Rows and columns of transactions, money moving between accounts, shell corporations with names like Northeast Investment Holdings and Atlantic Financial Partners. And at the bottom of several pages, signatures authorizing transfers. One signature appeared over and over. Elegant, looping handwriting that I recognized from birthday cards and thank you notes, and every passive-aggressive message she'd ever left me about not loading the dishwasher correctly. "Margaret Stone." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The sound came out of me like air escaping from a balloon, high-pitched and slightly unhinged. The trucker at the counter looked over with concern, probably wondering if he should call someone or just mind his business. He chose business. "Well," I said when I could finally breathe again, "I always knew she was evil, but embezzlement? Money laundering? Corporate fraud on a massive scale? That's new. That's a fun development. Really adds dimension to all those terrible Thanksgiving dinners where she criticized my job and my car and my general existence." "Your mother-in-law," Joanna said, her voice flat and factual, was the family accountant. She managed the Carrington financial empire for over 30 years. Every illegal transaction, every laundered dollar, every offshore account. She knew about it, facilitated it, and profited from it. And Lisa, Elizabeth, she figured this out. "She figured all of it out," Cortez said. "Spent years documenting everything. Her brother William tried to go public with part of it, and you know how that ended. So Elizabeth got smarter. She went deeper, collected more evidence, and created a fail-safe." He gestured to the box. "This. Everything needed to bring down the entire operation. Banks, shell corporations, political connections, payoffs, it's all here. The waitress appeared with coffee I hadn't ordered, poured it silently, and disappeared again like a ghost who'd given up on haunting and settled for minimum wage. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. So what now? We take this to the police? The FBI? Post it on Reddit and let the internet handle it. We set a trap, Joanna said simply. She pulled out a tablet, already loaded with a video recording setup. You're going to send Margaret a message. Tell her you have what she's looking for. Give her a time limit, 12 hours before you take everything to the authorities. And then what? She shows up and kills me? Great plan. Really well thought out. Then we record everything, Cortez said. Get her confession, her associates, documentation of the threats. Build a case that's ironclad. He leaned forward. Your wife died trying to do this. We can finish it. I looked at the box, at the ledgers, at my reflection in the coffee. Thought about Lisa, Elizabeth, keeping all these secrets, carrying this weight, trying to protect me while building a case against her own family. Fine, I said. But if I die, I'm haunting all of you. Just so we're clear on that. We recorded the video message in the bathroom of Sullivan's Diner, which was exactly as glamorous as it sounds. The fluorescent lighting made me look like a corpse. The graffiti on the walls added a lovely murder scene ambience, and somewhere in the background, you could hear the unmistakable sound of a toilet that had given up on life. Peak cinematography, really. Spielberg would be proud. Joanna propped her tablet against the paper towel dispenser, adjusted the angle so it caught my face and not the creative drawings of body parts on the stall door, and nodded. Ready? Oh yeah, totally ready, I said, running my hands through my hair in a futile attempt to look less like a man having a complete mental breakdown. I've always wanted to threaten my criminal mother-in-law while standing next to a urinal. Really captures the gravitas of the moment. Just read the script, she said, handing me her phone with bullet points typed out in that clean, lawyerly font that probably cost extra. There's a script? Of course there's a script. I skimmed it quickly. This makes me sound way more confident than I actually am. Can we add something about how I'm terrified and possibly having a heart attack? No, Joanna said flatly. Confidence sells. Terror gets you killed. Fair point. Cortez stood by the door, keeping watch in case anyone decided they needed to use the facilities during my impromptu hostage negotiation video. Whenever you're ready, he said. And try to sound angry. Dangerous, even. Right, dangerous. I'm a 43-year-old IT guy whose most dangerous skill is passive-aggressive emails. But sure, I'll channel my inner action hero. I cleared my throat, looked at the camera, and tried to imagine I was someone who had their life together and wasn't currently hiding in a truck stop bathroom. Margaret, more authority, Joanna coached.